Committee will come to order without objection. All members will have 5 days to submit statements, extraneous material, and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. We're here this morning to hear from my House colleagues about their legislative priorities in this committee's jurisdiction. To all of you, welcome to the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm proud of the work that this committee has done so far this Congress, notably some of the most bipartisan successes in the House, done in partnership with my friend, Ranking Member McCall. We're pleased to have this opportunity today to hear from our colleagues about their legislative priorities, especially colleagues who do not sit on this committee. After brief opening remarks by myself and Ranking Member McCall, each witness will have 5 minutes to testify and then answer questions from members of the committee. Witnesses testifying today will be recognized in the order in which they arrive. As this hearing is intended to be primarily a listening session, I do not intend to engage in extended questioning of the witnesses. So I look forward to hearing your testimony, and now I'll recognize my friend, the Ranking Member, Mr. McCall of Texas, for any opening remarks he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing this morning, which gives members an opportunity to present their legislative ideas before this committee. I want to take this opportunity to highlight how productive the House Foreign Affairs Committee has been over the last year. 68 measures have passed the House this year, most passed on a bipartisan basis and overwhelmingly. And I'd also like to thank all members of this committee, all 3 of us here, for their hard work and for remaining above partisan politics. As we always say, politics should stop at the water's edge. Our shared commitment to that ideology has helped us achieve many wins, and I look forward to many more. I'm especially proud we were able to come together to pass a comprehensive state authorization bill this year. Oversight of the department is vital in helping our foreign services officers carry out their mission. We also had 2 important measures related to our strong support of Hong Kong become public law this year. You and I, Mr. Chairman, are actively working with our Senate counterparts to further increase that number. I look forward to working with you and hearing from our members today. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. McCall yields back. Thank you, Mr. McCall. I'll now recognize our witnesses for 5 minutes each in the order in which they've arrived. First is someone from my home state of New York. Our districts are actually quite close to each other. It's my pleasure to have her here, Representative Grace Meng of New York.
Chairman Engel, Ranking Member McCall, Subcommittee Chairwoman Karen Bass, Ranking Member Chris Smith, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss several of my priorities that are under the jurisdiction of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. As a former member of this committee, it's great to be back in this room with so many friends. First, I want to thank this committee for marking up 2 of my bills this year, the Refugee Sanitation Facility Safety Act, H.R. 615, which passed the House by unanimous consent in May, and the Divided Families Reunification Act, H.R. 1771, for which I'm optimistic that it will soon be considered on the floor of the House. One of my top priorities as a member of Congress is protecting those who are vulnerable around the world, whether women and girls seeking an education or employment, those who lack access to basic services, or victims of natural disasters. As a member of the State and Foreign Operations House Appropriations Committee, I'm proud to do what I can to help direct our federal funding priorities to address these concerns. Today, I want to bring to the attention of the committee 2 pieces of legislation. H.R. 4092, the Safe from the Start Act, which aims to prevent and respond to gender-based violence from the onset of emergencies. Too often, international response efforts fail to recognize gender-based violence as a problem until a major disaster response effort is underway. This legislation is intended to help the humanitarian community take preventative measures and ensure that quality services are available for survivors from the onset of an emergency or crisis. The Safe from the Start Act will increase dedicated GBV interventions, integrate GBV risk mitigation across all humanitarian sectors, and increase accountability. I'm thankful to the bipartisan co-leads of this legislation. Representatives Chris Stewart, Lois Franco, Mario Diaz-Balart, and Chrissy Houlihan, as well as the co-sponsors who sit on this committee. Representatives Dean Phillips, Ted Lieu, Gregory Meeks, David Cicilline, Guy Reschenthaler, Dina Titus, Ted Deutsch, and Adam Kinzinger. In the new year, I will also be introducing the Youth, Peace, and Security Act. There are more than 1.8 billion youth in the world, the largest number to have ever existed. Youth populations have long been at the forefront of building peace in their communities by creating youth-led movements, organizations, and networks to mitigate negative effects of conflict and to prevent recurring cycles of violence. Moreover, in countries in conflict, it will be the young people who will bear the burden of sustaining the peace over generations and leading their society from reconciliation to prosperity. This bill will authorize a youth coordinator, require a youth strategy, expand technical assistance to youth leaders, and create an emergency assistance fund. I look forward to introducing this legislation and hope to have the committee's support. Thank you again for allowing me to testify, and I look forward to continuing working with this committee in this second session of the 116th Congress. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and welcome back home. I remember when you were on this committee and contributed greatly to its well-being and the well-being of the issues that we take on all around the world. So thank you for coming back. Our next witness is Representative Ed Case of Hawaii. I'd like some of that weather in Hawaii. If you can box it up and send it here, I'd be most appreciative.
Thank you, Chair Engel, Ranking Member McCall, Chair Sherman. Aloha. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of this committee's and our Congress's legislative initiatives focused on the Pacific Islands, a critical region for my Hawaii and our country. The Pacific Islands and their exclusive economic zones encompass a vast area of the Pacific Ocean larger than the land area of Russia and China combined. Their challenges, opportunities, and our own engagements range across an equally wide spectrum, from defense to development, governance, the environment, and culture. We have a shared history dating back hundreds of years, and too many of our own, of course, have shed blood and still lie buried or lost throughout these lands and waters. The President's 2017 National Security Strategy and the 2018 National Defense Strategy rightly identified China as a central challenge and the Indo-Pacific as the region where the geopolitical competition between our countries and, quote, between free and repressive visions of world order, unquote, is taking place. Earlier this year, DoD issued its Indo-Pacific Strategy report that emphasized revitalized engagement in the Pacific Islands. In this, we are behind the curve, as not only China, but our partner countries, including Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, have substantially ramped up their engagement over the past decade. These Pacific Islands are critical to the United States, not only because of our shared interests, values, and history, but also because our country, of course, is part of them. Together, American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Marianas, and of course Hawaii provide vital links to this region, especially as Hawaii hosts the headquarters of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and its component commands, and institutions that promote our interests in the Pacific Islands, such as the East-West Center and the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies. Given the importance of this region to our national security, I'm very proud to have co-founded this year the first ever Congressional Pacific Islands Caucus with my friends, the Dean of this House, Mr. Young, and the Chairman, Mr. Sherman, and Ranking Member, Mr. Yoho, of this committee's Subcommittee for Asia, the Pacific, and Non-Proliferation. I'm here today to testify in support of a sound, cohesive, and long-term U.S. strategy of full engagement in this region across all areas. This critical geopolitical competition in the Pacific Islands demands this whole-of-government strategy, which enhances and balances our military edge with necessary additional increased development assistance and diplomatic and cultural engagement based on our shared values and history. Specifically, Congress should enact legislation building on the progress made by ARIA and the BUILD Act from last Congress to provide the right tools and authorize the necessary funding to compete against potential adversaries and maintain trust among our allies and partners in our leadership. This renewed effort is critical to our success. A few months ago, I met with fellows of the East-West Center's Pacific Islands Leadership Program to discuss their perceptions of the United States and its role in the region. These young professionals and future leaders of their Pacific Island homes expressed to me their concern that the U.S. had neglected their part of the world. To them, the connective tissue that has long bound our nations and peoples together was weakened by our perceived absence and strained by the rapidly changing regional dynamics. To address this challenge, I hope to work with my caucus and this committee on new and renewed initiatives in 3 areas: diplomacy, development, and democracy. In diplomacy, this includes bolstering our presence in the Pacific Islands and participating more regularly and at more senior levels in existing regional organizations like the Pacific Islands Forum, the Pacific Community, and more. The development challenges in the Pacific Islands present additional opportunities for U.S. engagement, especially in healthcare, fisheries, and marine resource management, climate change, and U.S. trade and private sector investment. Lastly, we must support democracy, good governance, and the rule of law in the Pacific Islands, just as we do around the world. By doing so, we empower citizens and civil society to combat corruption and hold governments accountable in upholding their interests and sovereignty. In conclusion, given the accelerating importance of the Pacific Islands to our national interests, I hope members of this committee and other members of our body will consider joining our Pacific Islands Caucus and work with us to send a strong signal of our commitment to our allies and partners in this region. I look forward to working with the committee and its members and staff on achieving our goals in a region that will truly determine our place in a rapidly changing world for generations. Thank you for your time and interest.
Thank you, Mr. Case, for testifying. I appreciate your remarks, and certainly will consider them as the Foreign Affairs Committee considers its legislative priorities for next year. So thank you for coming here today. Okay. Next, my pleasure to call on Representative Al Green of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank Chairman Engel, Ranking Member McCall, and Mr. Sherman, and all other members of this august body for presenting me this opportunity to testify before the committee. I'm on a mission of mercy. I'd also like to thank them for your efforts, in particular for your leadership in sending a bicameral letter to the White House requesting the dispatch of Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs for Mr. Austin Tice. I'm on a mission of mercy. Because of you, the letter had support from 52 senators, 120 representatives, and for that, I'm especially thankful. I'm on a mission of mercy. Mr. Tice is a former Marine Corps captain and a freelance journalist from Houston, Texas. He's an Eagle Scout. He grew up wanting to become an international correspondent for NPR. Mr. Tice was an outstanding student. He attended the University of Houston for 1 year and then transferred to Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. His work was published in the Washington Post, McClatchy newspaper, as well as other forms of news media. He was enrolled in Georgetown Law School and had completed 2 years before his sudden disappearance. In May of 2012, Mr. Tice went to Syria as a freelance journalist to tell the story of the ongoing conflict there. He was abducted after being detained at a checkpoint in Damascus, and approximately a month later, a 43-second video emerged with the title, "Austin Tice is Alive. I'm on a mission of mercy." The video showed Austin being held by a group of unidentified men with assault rifles. There has been absolutely no contact with his captors since. We can only imagine the horrors Mr. Austin Tice has been through the past 7 years. The Tice family, whom I know quite well, Deborah and Mark, and the U.S. government are both confident that Mr. Tice is alive and have worked tirelessly for his release. The FBI has offered a $1 million reward for information leading to his return. I'm on a mission of mercy. One of our most important responsibilities as elected officials is to protect the American people on both domestic and foreign soil. We have an obligation to Mr. Tice and his parents, who have waited for over 7 years to see their son. I'm indebted to all my colleagues across both chambers and both sides of the aisle for their advocacy on behalf of Mr. Tice and his family. But I believe that we can still do more. This is why I'm testifying today in support of my resolution HRES 17. This resolution expresses concern over the detention of Mr. Tice and encourages the Department of State, the Office of Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, and other U.S. government entities to engage with Syria to facilitate Mr. Tice's safe release. You want to say anything? Yeah. I have never given up on my constituents or family members of constituents who have been deported or detained by foreign governments. 7 years is simply too long for Mr. Tice to be separated from his loved ones. And I ask this committee to take up my resolution and show that Congress not only agrees with this sentiment, but also calls for his safe return. I thank you again, and I would just simply add, I have been with the family on multiple occasions. They have visited Washington, D.C. Mr. Tice's mother has gone to Syria. She has been to Lebanon. She has left no stone unturned, as is the case with his father. We believe him to be alive, and we believe that it's time to bring him home. I know that it's a rare circumstance for resolutions to be brought to the floor, but this is a mission of mercy. And I beg that you would give extreme consideration to the resolution so that we may do one additional thing to bring Mr. Tice home. I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and certainly appreciate your remarks, and we'll certainly consider them as the Foreign Affairs Committee does its legislative priorities for next year. I know Mr. McCall wanted to make a statement or ask some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we thank you, excuse me, I have a cold today, Congressman Green. I've met the parents myself as well. I join you in your mission of mercy. I want to thank you for bringing this resolution to the committee's attention. And I hope the United States government can exercise all of its powers to bring Austin Tice back home to Texas. And we will give your resolution due consideration. And in fact, I don't want to jump ahead of the chairman, but I myself, speaking for myself, am very supportive. So thank you.
I thank the gentleman very much.
Thank you, and we'll certainly be in touch. Thank you. Okay. All right, next is Congressman French Hill from Arkansas. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member McCall, members of the committee, thank you for letting members come before you today and testify on their priorities. Today, I'd like to talk about my resolution, HRES 49, supporting Coptic Christians in Egypt, which has a diverse and bipartisan coalition of members that co-sponsor it. My Democratic lead on HRES 49 is my friend on Foreign Affairs Committee member Dave Cicilline. My resolution currently has 71 co-sponsors, including 25 from this committee. I introduced this resolution in the 115th Congress following a 2017 trip to Egypt. While preparing for the trip, visiting the country, and returning home, I repeatedly heard about the plight of Coptic Christians in Egypt. Although the Copts have been the victims of numerous terrorist attacks by groups like ISIS, what's most disturbing to me are the attacks against Copts that are carried out by their fellow Egyptians. Most recently in Minya province in Upper Egypt, in late November, a mother and her son were stabbed by a Muslim man while sitting in front of their home after being told that Christians are not allowed outside. Luckily, they were not killed. Sadly, this is a persistent narrative in Minya. The 2018 and 2019 State Department reports on religious freedom in Egypt mention specifically Minya province as an area of concern more than any other province in the country. Also in late November, Rami Kamo, a Coptic Christian and founder of Coptic Christian Rights Organization, was arrested by the Egyptian police and accused of numerous terrorism-related charges. It's also reported that he's undergone intensive interrogation and has been given no legal representation. Unfortunately, cases like this in Egypt are becoming more numerous. Our country and our citizens over the generations have worked mightily to live up to the values and unalienable rights granted to us by God above and enshrined in our founding documents, especially the vocal support of free expression abroad, particularly in the form of advocacy for religious tolerance and freedom, the rule of law, human rights, and education for women and minorities. These are fundamental tenets of our foreign policy. In my work on this resolution here in the House, I continue to give voice to this very American ideal. Likewise, I've met with religious leaders from all across the Levant, from Lebanon to Syria, Iraq, and in Jerusalem, with an eye towards better shaping American and allied support of Christians and other persecuted religious minorities in the region. I have great respect for Egyptian President El-Sisi, and I applaud the changes and message that he's made in the areas of religious tolerance. He continues to say and do the right things at the top level of government, and Egypt is a good partner with the United States. President El-Sisi has a good relationship with the Coptic Pope, attends Mass on multiple occasions, has reconstructed destroyed churches, constructing the largest Christian cathedral in the Middle East in the new administrative center in Egypt. He's held terrorists accountable for their atrocities. However, I believe there is more that can be done. And as the second highest receiver of American military support, the U.S. government must use its tools and hold our allies like Egypt to a higher standard in order to receive our aid. It's in this regard that I believe the one vehicle readily available to this committee to highlight the United States government's concern of the treatment of the Coptic Christians in Egypt is my resolution, H-Res 49. Let's recall President Reagan's admonition as to our responsibility. Respect for human rights is not social work. It's not merely an act of compassion. It is the first obligation of a government and the source of its legitimacy. I appreciate Chairman Engel, your leadership on this committee, Ranking Member McCall. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you on this important matter. And with your permission, I'd like to add a supplemental item that complies with your page limitation for the record.
Without objection. So.
I thank the chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you. We appreciate your coming. And, you know, when I hear French Hill, I think of this area around Jerusalem. So
it's a great place for coffee.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, Representative Chip Roy of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the ranking member, and appreciate you all giving us the courtesy of being able to come and speak about some matters that are important to us and legislation that we think might be important for this committee to consider. My colleague, Representative Green from Tennessee, and I introduced legislation earlier this year called the Drug Cartel Terrorist Designation Act, calling on the administration to designate certain cartels, and that's a very important distinction, certain cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. 10 other members joined a letter also to Secretary Pompeo that reiterated this request. Specifically, H.R. 1700 requests that foreign terrorist organization designation for the following cartels: the Reynosa, Los Metros faction of the Gulf Cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, and the Cartel del Noreste that's affiliated with Los Zetas. I know that the chairman, the ranking member in this committee, is well aware of the extent to which cartels have operational control of the border, particularly in my home state of Texas and that of the ranking member. We know the extraordinary impact those cartels are having not only on the border communities, but our nation as a whole, our national security, as well as our friends to the south in Mexico, and destabilizing the region, not just in terms of drug trafficking, not just in terms of the economic impact, not in terms of just the profit to the cartels, which is massive, but our overall national security and stability and the political stability of Mexico, and impacting even our local politics in South Texas, where the Rio Grande Valley politicians are often under the thumb of the cartels with their reach across the border. What we have seen in recent months is troubling. We've seen, according to the Congressional Research Service, since 2006, there have been roughly 150,000 organized crime-related killings in Mexico alone. We've seen numbers even as high as 200,000 or more. Council on Foreign Relations paper updated in October of this year reports that murders are soaring in Mexico, and the homicide reached a new high of 36,000. Now, that alone isn't necessarily something that would say you'd want to move in the direction of a foreign terrorist organization designation, but the extent to which they have political influence, the extent to which that is a destabilizing force in Mexico and along our border is, I think, something that we should take note. In October, 35 Mexican police and National Guard troops were surrounded and outgunned by cartel forces, ultimately forcing to release drug lord Ovidio Guzman, otherwise known as El Chapo's son. Mexico's Citizens Council for Public Security lists that 42 of the 50 most violent cities in the world are in Latin America, and this is a direct result of cartels. We know about the drug trafficking, we know the danger, but even with the decrease in the amount of the human toll and the trafficking this fall, because of our engagement with Mexico, we saw mountains of fentanyl coming across our border. You can get the recent stats and we can pull them up, but the amount of fentanyl, heroin, cocaine pouring across our border is extraordinary, and we're seeing the direct impact in terms of the opioid abuse in our country. And I think that this is something that we ought to consider. And I know that a number of my colleagues are concerned about what this might do to the Return to Mexico program or other policies in terms of how we engage with Mexico because of the perceived danger of returning people to a country where you've got cartel control. To those who are concerned about that in the State Department or in the White House or in this body, I would say Mexico is as dangerous as Mexico is. There are 5 states that are designated level 4 states by the State Department. Tamaulipas is one of those. That's a no-travel zone. This isn't the Mexico of our parents and grandparents, Michael, right? I mean, this is, you don't go down there and go grab some lunch and just hang out for the afternoon in Reynosa. It's dangerous. I've sat overnight twice this year down in McAllen, sitting next to the river, listening to gunfire across the river. I mean, it is a dangerous zone, and this is literally in our backyard, and it is on fire. And as we've got people around the world right now defending the United States, I think we ought to be focusing on Mexico in our backyard. These organizations kill people. They post videos killing people. They put bodies in barrels of sulfuric acid. They behead people. There were 7 bodies found alongside the road. There were 9 hanging from a bridge. 27 people were locked in a bar and burned to death. This is the action of cartels right in our backyard. I would bring up one final point in the last minute I have. I wrote an op-ed in September pointing out that we had crossed the milestone of 18 years since the authorization of force in September of 2001. That means we have people that are enlisting in the armed forces today who were not alive when we passed the authorization of force under which they are now fighting. I think in light of what we've seen now coming out from the Washington Post reports this week, some of the question marks about what we're accomplishing in Afghanistan, as many good things as our men and women in uniform have done, and they have done enormously great things that are important for our national security, we ought to be taking a long, hard look at what we're asking our men and women in uniform to do, in particular in Afghanistan. And I think it is incumbent upon this body to have a clear mission for our men and women in uniform, to speak with one united voice on that front, even as we're seeing some of this information come in overseas. And I think we should have a renewed focus, as I already said, on the Western Hemisphere and our backyard and what's going on in Mexico. I appreciate the time of the chairman. I appreciate you opening up this day for us to come visit. Thank you all.
Thank you, Congressman, for testifying, and I know Mr. McCall wanted to make some brief remarks.
Well, I guess he's leaving. Hey, Congressman Roy, just one quick, I share your concern being from Texas. I think their tactics are like acts of terrorism. And when I chaired Homeland Security Committee, I saw the videos time and time again. And so I actually, interestingly, I introduced this bill in 2006. And it sat in the Judiciary Committee, which I think is a committee of jurisdiction, for this. And since that time, we passed the Kingpin Act, which does put sanctions on the cartels. It's a good step forward, but
Agreed.
Certainly take a look at the bill. but I do think it probably lies within the jurisdiction of judiciary, and I would encourage you to talk to the committee members over there as well.
I agree. And the point of coming here today was just the considerable expertise in this committee and how important this is from a national security and foreign relations standpoint, whether it's that bill or others. We should be taking a very specific and targeted process of how we're targeting the cartels. So appreciate that.
We thank you for that, and I see your daughter's waiting for you to.
She is patiently. She's looking forward to the White House Christmas party tonight. So
we'll see you there.
Have a good time, and thank you for testifying. Okay. Next, Representative John Garamendi of California, who would win a contest for the nicest Christmas card that we've received with all the grandchildren and everything else. So, congratulations.
Thank you. Indeed, Patty and I are blessed with that family, and thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. McCall, and Mr. Sherman, thank you very much for the opportunity to spend some time with you today. I'm here to speak on behalf of my legislation, H.R. 3456, the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act, and I respectfully request that you include this legislation in any upcoming hearing that you may have with the Director of the Peace Corps on Peace Corps issues. I want to thank my fellow Peace Corps Caucus co-chairs, Representative Joe Kennedy of Massachusetts and Garrett Graves of Louisiana, for their support as original co-sponsors. Like successive generations of young Americans, my wife Patty and I answered President Kennedy's call and served in the Peace Corps in Ethiopia, 1966 to 68. Since the establishment of the Peace Corps in 1961, more than 230,000 Americans have volunteered and served in 141 countries around the world. Today, there are some 8,000 Peace Corps volunteers serving in 65 countries. However, Congress last reauthorized the Peace Corps in 1999, and that was Public Law 106-30, which did expire at the end of the fiscal year of 2003. Now more than ever, Congress must support the Peace Corps' mission and realize President Kennedy's vision of generations of young Americans ready to serve their nation and make the world a better place, both overseas and here in America. Our Peace Corps Reauthorization Act of 2019 would do just that by providing additional federal resources to better support current, returning, and former Peace Corps volunteers by doing the following things: authorizing $450 million per fiscal year for the Peace Corps, an increase over the flat $410 million funding level provided by Congress in most recent years. Also increasing the monthly allowance for Peace Corps volunteers and leaders to $417 per month of service completed to reflect the increased cost of living and provide a $10,000 for a full 2-year term of service. It also extends the Peace Corps volunteers' federal hiring preference during any hiring freezes, government shutdowns, or while volunteer receives workers' compensation benefits for an injury occurred during their Peace Corps service. Also increases the workers' compensation rate for all Peace Corps volunteers injured or disabled during their service from the federal GS-7 to a GS-11 level. The same rate provided for Peace Corps volunteers with dependent children under current law. As co-chair of the Congressional Peace Corps Caucus, I'm proud to continue this work in support of the Peace Corps mission, its volunteers, and the indelible impact their service has had on the lives of needy people around the world. I hope to work with you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member McCall and the other members of the committee to advance the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act in this Congress. Our bipartisan bill is endorsed by the National Peace Corps Association. So, Mr. Chairman, I certainly would hope that you would commit to work with us on holding a hearing. I thank you and yield the remaining time that I have.
Thanks very much for testifying, and we all appreciate your remarks and certainly will consider them as the Foreign Affairs Committee does its legislative priorities for the coming year. So thank you, and I know we'll have further conversation about this.
Indeed, we will, and I'll catch the three of you on the floor.
Okay.
Thank you so very much.
It's a deal. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. And now we have Representative Brian Steele of Wisconsin.
Thank you, Chairman Engel, and thank you, Ranking Member McCall. It's also good to see my colleague from my home committee, Financial Services, Mr. Sherman, with us here today. I appreciate all of your commitment to addressing the scourge that is human trafficking. I'm here today to shed light on an issue that affects every corner of this nation and every country in this world: human trafficking. Human trafficking is a horrendous crime that represents a real threat across the United States, and in particular to the people of Southeast Wisconsin. This isn't just a faraway problem. Human trafficking has been reported in every county in the state of Wisconsin. Boys, girls, men, women, all ages, nationalities, and backgrounds are victims of human trafficking. More than 500,000 people are trafficked across international borders every year. More than 14,000 women, children, and men are trafficked into the United States. This is a global epidemic. Criminals have become organized and sophisticated in their ways, making human trafficking a lucrative industry. The International Labor Organization estimates more than $150 billion in illegal profits is made from forced labor each year. If there's a profit to be made, these criminals will take advantage of it. That is where a nonpartisan solution comes into play to deter these crimes from occurring. Currently, the United States uses the Trafficking in Persons report to engage foreign governments to combat human trafficking. Governments will report their efforts to stop human trafficking within their own country. Foreign aid is then given to these countries based on their strides to prevent these crimes. However, while Trafficking in Person reports evaluate several criteria, there's no requirement to showcase a country's efforts to disrupt the illicit financing of human trafficking. In April, I introduced my first bill, the Exposing the Financing of Human Trafficking Act. This nonpartisan bill holds countries accountable for their involvement in human trafficking. The Exposing Financing of Human Trafficking Act requires countries to report their efforts to investigate, prevent, and prosecute financial crimes associated with human trafficking. Right now, countries that receive U.S. aid have no responsibility to report their effort to prevent money laundering from human trafficking. We can change this. We must follow the money. And while this bill may be a simple change, it will have a global impact on how countries combat human trafficking. 47 of my colleagues have joined me in this effort, many of whom are members of this committee. Not only does this bill strengthen our effort to combat human traffickers' use of the domestic financial system, it importantly encourages other countries to cut off traffickers from the global financial system. This effort is just one piece of the puzzle. Fighting human trafficking requires a multifaceted approach. That's why awareness campaigns, school counselors, teachers, law enforcement officers all play a vital role. I'm thankful to the Southeast Wisconsin law enforcement community. Many of our county sheriffs and police officers are working diligently on human trafficking. We have to work together, all of us, Democrats and Republicans, local, state, federal, international partners, to take this crisis head on. I'm going to continue to work with my community in Southeast Wisconsin to address this problem, and I'll continue to fight this issue here in Congress. Bringing attention to human trafficking is a necessary first step, and passing this legislation and other anti-human trafficking bills is the next step. Our work isn't done. So today, I ask the committee to mark up the Exposing the Financing of Human Trafficking Act. I'm confident it would pass with broad bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle. And thank you again to Chairman Engel and Ranking Member McCall for the opportunity to speak here today and for your work on this issue. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Steele. Those statistics are certainly very shocking. If you start to digest them, it really is overwhelming. And so we certainly appreciate your remarks, and we'll absolutely consider them as the Foreign Affairs Committee considers its legislative priorities for the new year. Well, thank you. I don't know if Mr. McCall.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'm very involved with this issue. It's modern day slavery in our lifetime, and we need to stop it. And so I look forward to looking at your bill. I think Brian Fitzpatrick's in banking for human trafficking, a very similar bill, did pass this committee. It's sitting in financial services, so maybe you, Mr. Sherman, could possibly move that along as well. And I know January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and I brought a victim, Courtney Litvak, to the White House to meet Ivanka Trump, and she invited her to attend the summit at the White House in January. So I look forward to working with you on this important issue and doing everything we can to stop it.
Thank you very much for your efforts.
I yield.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that concludes our witnesses, so let me again reiterate that we thank all of you and appreciate all the remarks, and we'll certainly consider them as the Foreign Affairs Committee does its legislative priorities for next year. If there isn't any other business or any other witnesses, then I will adjourn the hearing. Hearing nobody, let me say the hearing is officially adjourned, and thank you all for attending.
I don't think I've ever been as eloquent at a hearing until this one.